In the 1950s, British scholar C.S. Lewis released a 7-volume series called The Chronicles of Narnia, a Christian allegorical account for children taking place in the fictional dimension of Narnia. While some people, such as my librarian when I was a kid, might suggest that you should read these books in publication order, they're wrong, and I don't feel like summarizing it that way. The first story chronologically is The Magician's Nephew, with protagonists Diggory and Polly. Diggory's Uncle Andrew is a mediocre magician who is experimenting with dimensional travel by trying to teleport guinea pigs to another universe via magic rings. Diggory and Polly inadvertently stumble into Uncle Andrew's study and are forced to be human trials for his dimension hopping. The rings transport Diggory and Polly to a dimensional hub in a forest full of pools of water, each representing a new universe. Donning their rings, they jump into a pool and are transported to the land of Charn. Out of curiosity, and despite Polly's protests, Diggory curiously strikes a magical bell which frees the genocidal queen Jadis, destroyer of her own disheveled world, who hitches a ride out of her dimension as Diggory and Polly try to escape. Jadis proceeds to terrorize downtown London with her superhuman strength. Diggory and Polly, attempting to save London from this unorthodox menace, teleport Jadis once more using their rings. This new attempt to get rid of Jadis lands Diggory, Polly, Uncle Andrew, as well as a random carriage driver and his horse in a new world, a world that is the opposite of the dead Charn, a brand new empty world. Aslan, God manifested as a lion, creates in this world a new universe, the land of Narnia, with the power of his voice. Jadis decides to flee into the new world of Narnia, but Aslan tasks Diggory with partially repairing the damage he has done and letting Jadis loose on an innocent world, since Diggory rang the bell in the first place, by sending him to a magical garden with apple trees, and taking one apple from the tree back to Aslan. Among the enchanted trees, Diggory finds Jadis, who has stolen one of the apples which gives her immortality, as well as a pale, desaturated skin, for which she would thereafter be known as the White Witch. She tempts Diggory with the same gift, but Diggory valiantly refuses. Returning with the apple, Aslan uses it to plant a magical tree to protect the future inhabitants of Narnia against the White Witch. However, Aslan allows Diggory to pick a new apple from the new tree, which will not grant immortality, but will allow Diggory to heal his bedridden mother when he returns to Earth. Their mission complete, Aslan returns Diggory and Polly to their own world, and after healing his mother, Diggory plants the apple core which grows a new third-generation, now marginally magical tree. The next book in the series is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the most famous book of the Chronicles of Narnia and the first written. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe tells how the Pevensey siblings, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, are sent into the English countryside to escape the London Blitz during the Second World War. The children are sent to the large house of the now grown-up Diggory, known to them as the Professor. In Diggory's house sits a wardrobe made from the wood of his former apple tree, which secretly still retains magical properties, functioning as a portal back to Narnia, through which Lucy, the youngest sibling, encounters a forest and meets a faun named Tumnus. When she relates her fantastical story, Peter and Susan conclude that Lucy must be going insane since the entryway won't open for them, and they go to the Professor for advice. To their great surprise, Diggory, obviously, backs up the possibility of Lucy's story, and not soon after, Peter, Susan, and Edmund join Lucy on a trip to Narnia. Because time flows differently in Narnia than in our world, the White Witch has had hundreds of years to overthrow the Narnians and cast a wintry spell upon the world since Diggory was last there, and secretly she has converted Edmund to her side. As the 4 Pevensey children explore the new world, they find that Tumnus has been abducted, but they meet a new ally in the form of Mr. and Mrs. Beaver, who tell them about a prophecy that the children will become the new kings and queens of Narnia when the witch is defeated, and tells them about Aslan and his imminent return, at which point Edmund sneaks away to report back to the White Witch. Peter, Susan, Lucy, and the Beavers realize that Edmund has betrayed them, and they hightail it to meet up with Aslan at the stone table. With Aslan's return to Narnia, the witch's wintry spell begins to thaw, and they meet Father Christmas, which is British for Santa, and he bestows gifts on the company. The group hightail it to the stone table, and with his new sword, Peter kills the witch's wolf captain. To keep the prophecy about 4 children overthrowing her from coming true, the witch tries to kill Edmund, who, as a traitor, she has the right to kill. To save Edmund's life, Aslan dies in his stead. But this only hastens the witch's demise, because Aslan is resurrected through ancient Narnian magic, and he kills the White Witch. The 4 Pevensey children, including the redeemed Edmund, become the monarchs of Narnia. But before we can finish The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, we have to accept a brief side quest called The Horse and His Boy. The Horse and His Boy follows the tale of a boy who lives in the sandy desert country in the south of Narnia called Calormen. When the boy, whose name was Shasta, meets a talking horse named Bree, they escape together from Shasta's abusive foster father and go on a journey to reach Bree's home country of Narnia. Along the way, Shasta meets a parallel group of travelers in the form of the talking horse Hwin and the Calorman noble Aravis. The group passes through the great city of Tashban on their journey to escape Calorman, but suddenly Shasta is abducted by visiting Narnians who mistake him for their friend from the kingdom of Archenland, the Crown Prince Corin. Because the Narnians think he is the Prince Corin, they openly discuss their own plans to escape the city of Tashban, because the son of the Calorman king, Rabadash, has made unwanted advances toward the now grown-up Queen Susan. Shasta, meanwhile, runs away from the Narnians and meets back up with his friends, and finds out from Aravis that Rabadash is secretly planning to attack Archenland where the Narnians are hiding. The whole group is chased by a lion who turns out to be Aslan, providentially directing their journey, which allows Shasta to warn the king of Archenland, who is able to defeat Rabadash thanks to Shasta's warning. In a twist ending, Shasta turns out to be the older brother of Corin, who was lost as a baby, which is why they look so much alike. The Narnians safely return to their own country, and it's at this point that the horse and his boy joins back up with the lion, the witch, and the wardrobe, which concludes with the 4 Pevensey siblings stumbling back through the portal to their own dimension, at which point the years spent in Narnia melt away, since time moves differently in that land, and they are returned to being kids. The next adventure in the Narnia series is Prince Caspian, which tells the story of Caspian, the nephew of King Miraz, the leader of an occupying army called the Telmarines, that have taken over Narnia many hundreds of years, in Narnia time, after the events of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Miraz has driven all the magical creatures into hiding, but he makes a fatal error when he hires a tutor for Caspian who turns out to be part dwarf, and tells Caspian stories of the old days of Narnia, hoping he can convince Caspian to be a better monarch than Miraz. But everything changes when Miraz's wife gives birth to a son. Caspian is the lawful ruler of the Telmarines because his father was the old Telmarine king, and that makes him an obstacle to the throne, so Miraz wants to have him killed. With the help of his tutor, Caspian flees into the forest, gains allies from the magical creatures, but is surrounded by the more powerful Telmarine army. As a last resort, the Narnians blow a magical horn that once belonged to the fabled Queen Susan. Magic reaches out from the world of Narnia to Earth, and pulls the Pevensey children back to Narnia, depositing them at their old palace of Cair Paravel. The magic of Narnia makes them remember their old skills, like swordplay, that they had as adults. At Cair Paravel, the Pevenseys meet Trumpkin the dwarf, an ally of Caspian's resistance movement to overthrow the false King Miraz. And after some convincing that 4 children would be any help in a war, and that they really are ancient monarchs, the team sets off to join up with Caspian, with the help, as always, of Aslan. Everyone is guided where they need to go, and Peter challenges King Miraz to single combat on Caspian's behalf. Though Peter wins the competition, King Miraz's advisors declare treachery and cause everything to erupt into battle. Aslan summons allies to help with the war, like the tree spirits and old gods, and the Telmarines surrender. With the Narnians having won, Aslan gives the Telmarines the option either to stay in a land of magic and talking animals with Caspian as king, or to go to Earth through a magical door created by Aslan. Aslan also tells the Pevensey children that they can go to their own home through this doorway, but before they go, Aslan delivers the news that Susan and Peter will never return to Narnia. After Prince Caspian comes the voyage of the Dawn Treader. In this story we are introduced to the Pevensey's cousin. C.S. Lewis, in his whimsical way, introduces the character by saying, "There was a boy called Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it." As the story begins, Lucy and Edmund are staying with their relatives and find themselves staring at a painting of a ship that looks unusually Narnian to them. Eustace intrudes upon them and begins berating them, when all of a sudden the ship comes to life and water begins to pour out of the painting, teleporting Lucy, Edmund, and Eustace to Narnia once again. Deposited in the ocean, the group are rescued by the inhabitants of the ship, the Dawn Treader, led by none other than Prince Caspian from the previous book. Now resolutely the King of Narnia, Caspian welcomes the group aboard. Eustace immediately begins picking fights and making a nuisance of himself with the crew, particularly Reepicheep, the honorable Mouse Knight. In this book, Caspian is on a mission to fulfill an oath he made to find the 7 Telmarine lords who were loyal to his father, the King of Narnia, and who left Narnia while Miraz was king. Reepicheep hopes to do far more, however, going even further to the land of Aslan beyond the sea in the far east. The first step on the journey is the Lone Islands, which are Narnian territories, but have neglected that relationship and begun to treat themselves as self-governing. Worse still, they have started up the lucrative practice of the slave trade, which Lucy, Edmund, Caspian, Reepicheep, and Eustace stumble into when they begin exploring one of the islands, and are promptly captured and sold into slavery. Luckily for Caspian, one of the 7 lords, the Lord Byrne, has taken up residence on the island, and buys Caspian because he reminds him of Caspian's father, which allows Caspian to be freed and retake the Lone Islands, abolishing the slave trade and installing Lord Byrne as its new ruler. With one lord down and 6 to go, the gang head further east and encounter a new mysterious island. To avoid doing any work to repair the Dawn Treader which had become damaged, Eustace goes off to hide, but encounters a magical bracelet and is cursed to become a dragon. With a new dragonly exterior to match his interior, Eustace finds himself becoming a more penitent member of the company, and unexpectedly makes a friend of Reepicheep, who had previously been Eustace's greatest adversary. With Eustace's character much improved by becoming a dragon, Aslan at last lifts Eustace's curse and turns him back into a boy. Rejoining the crew, they realize that the cursed bracelet, which Eustace had worn as a dragon, belonged to the Lord Octasian, who they surmise died on the island. With 2 lords accounted for, the Dawn Treader heads for Goldwater Island, which turns everything that touches its water to gold, including people, as the unlucky Lord Restamar found to his peril. Goldwater Island is followed by the Island of the Duffers, who are goofy creatures which purport that they are oppressed by an evil sorcerer, and they insist that Lucy break an invisibility spell cast upon them. But the magician is actually quite friendly, and the Duffers are his exasperating subjects given to him by Aslan, who is also revealed when Lucy performs the spell to make the Duffers visible again. The next island is the island where dreams come true, where every nightmare presents itself to the voyagers. Here they find Lord Roop, who was trapped on the island for many years and who is very relieved to be rescued. The final island of the journey is Ramadu's Island, where dwells one of the stars, the supernatural beings whose brightness illuminates a Narnian sky, and whose daughter Caspian falls in love with. Having fallen into an enchanted sleep, the final 3 lords of the journey are located on Ramadu's Island, thus completing Caspian's oath. Beyond Ramadu's Island sits the end of the Narnian world, and Caspian bitterly realizes his duties as king prevent him from journeying further. Lucy, Edmund, Eustace, and Reepicheep continue on to a place where the water curves and becomes the sky. Reepicheep paddles onward into paradise, but Aslan appears for the children to send them back to Earth. Regretfully, Aslan tells Lucy and Edmund that they will never return to Narnia, and must learn to know Aslan in their own world, for there I have another name. The penultimate novel of the Chronicles of Narnia is The Silver Chair. Once again, we are introduced to a new character called Jill Pole. When Jill and Eustace, who attend the same school, are pursued by bullies, they ask for Aslan's help, who brings the both of them to Narnia, where they are tasked by Aslan with a mission to recover Prince Rilian, the son of the now elderly King Caspian. To aid them in their mission, Aslan gives Jill instructions that they should observe in order to succeed, most of which they fail at. The first instruction is that Eustace should greet an old friend, but since Eustace does not recognize Caspian, he and Jill must go on without his help. Instead, they make do with the assistance of an owl called Glimfeather, who introduces them to a strange creature called a Marshwiggle named Puddleglum. Puddleglum is a based and Aslan-pilled guy who acts as a guide to Eustace and Jill. The trio head north where Aslan told Jill to go, but when they meet the seemingly kind Lady of the Green Kirtle and her Black Knight, she advises them to divert their course and go to the castle of the Gentle Giants, who will have you for their autumn feast, which anyone who has ever read a fairy tale could tell you was going to end with the group narrowly avoiding being eaten by giants. Puddleglum, ever the voice of reason, advised against going to see the giants since it contradicts Aslan's instructions, but he was overruled by the rest of the company who wanted a warm meal. Because Jill and Eustace ignored the second instructions from Aslan, they initially missed seeing the third one, but were eventually able to work out how to get to an underground city, ruled by the Lady of the Green Kirtle. Here they find Prince Rilian, who has been enchanted by the lady, except during the night when he is bound to a silver chair. The enchanted prince, under the thrall of the lady, told the trio a lie to keep them from releasing him, but during the night he is his true self and is free to persuade them to follow Aslan's final instruction and release him, at which point he smashes the chair. The Lady of the Green Kirtle appears and makes a last-ditch effort to enchant the group, but Puddleglum breaks the enchantment by stamping out her fire. They all escape the underground land after killing the lady, who briefly turned into a serpent herself, and Prince Rilian is able to see his father one last time before Caspian dies. Aslan takes Eustace and Jill to his own country, where they are able to briefly see Caspian young again, before the children are returned to their own world. The Silver Chair complete, the next and final Narnian adventure is The Last Battle. The Last Battle is the most somber of the Narnian novels, and takes place in the last days of Narnia, when King Tirian, whose ancestor was Caspian, rules over Narnia. Trouble brews in Narnia when the villainous ape Shift convinces a donkey to pretend to be Aslan by wearing the skin of a dead lion, and through this donkey, Shift accomplishes his dastardly will, even going so far as to lead Narnia's enemies, the Calormans, into the country. Meanwhile on Earth, all of the children and former children who have once visited Narnia have created their own society to reminisce about the old days when they were adventurers and monarchs of that land. Jill, Eustace, Diggory, Polly, Peter, Edmund, and Lucy are all members, all save Susan, who has turned her back on Narnia and on Aslan, beginning to believe that her old adventures as a queen were nothing more than her childhood imagination. King Tirian appears to their secret society by the power of Aslan, having been captured by Calorman soldiers and seeking their aid. To rescue Tirian, the group decides to dig up the magic rings that Diggory and Polly once used to travel between worlds, but they end up not needing them as Aslan takes Jill and Eustace there by magic to rescue Tirian. Narnia's crisis in the final battle is far more internal than external, as the magical creatures of that land find themselves shaken in their faith in Aslan, some renouncing him altogether, like the majority of the dwarves. Shift and the Calorman further blaspheme Aslan by claiming that he and the Calorman gods Tash are one person. Tirian's allies, who are faithful to Aslan, fight valiantly, but all fail and are killed by Shift and his Calorman allies. Shift pretends that Aslan resides in a stable, and he sends Narnians who disagree with his judgment to the stable to be secretly killed by the Calorman soldiers. A faithful Calorman named Emeth, who loves Tash, declares that if it is true that Aslan and Tash are one, he wishes to go into the stable to see Tash for himself, and he disappears inside. He is followed by Tirian, Eustace, and Jill, though somewhat less willingly. Inside the stable, they find that they have been taken to a new and truer version of Narnia made by Aslan. Emeth is welcome there since he lived as a faithful servant of Tash, believing Tash to be the true god, and all the other friends of Narnia are found there too. Aslan goes through the door again, and he brings a close to the old Narnian world. All the faithful creatures of Narnia are welcomed through the door into paradise, but the unfaithful animals lose the ability to speak and leave into the darkness. Narnia ends, and the new Narnia begins, where all the good and faithful servants of Aslan live forever, and the protagonists of all 7 books meet their old, long-dead friends. And with that, the last battle is complete.